Last week we began the Mahā Hatthipadopama Sutta, the Greater Discourse on the elephant's footprint, Majjhima Nikāya, Sutta number 28, from the middle-length Discourses. And in it we saw how Venerable Sāriputta was beautifully elucidating and unweaving, opening up, unfolding various different but very much connected, deep principles and aspects of the Dhamma taught by Lord Buddha. And we saw how he began talking about the elements in such a beautiful way. It requires our attention, as often is the case, if not always, but especially when we are discussing this sutta, and whenever you have Venerable Sāriputta, you have to be paying close attention, because it's whatever he discusses, it's drenched in wisdom. And whatever is drenched in wisdom cannot be extracted when the mind is in a superficial state, in a mundane state, which often is the case, even with advanced meditators. We're living in a time period in this world, in this human civilization of ours, in a way where we are encouraged to be absent-minded, or at least have the attention placed on the wrong things. When you are not mindful, then you most certainly are placing your attention on the wrong things. The key factor of the Dhamma, any principle you choose from the teachings, always finds its way back. It circles the drain, as they say. It comes back to this one very important principle that makes or breaks your practice. And that is whether there is the presence of yoniso manasikara, wise, radical attention. There's no way, ifs and buts, there's no way out of this. And some people I still hear coming to me and saying or mentioning of how deep they have gone in their practice in the past, or they're able to go in and out of jhanas, or they've attained this or that. It means nothing. Nothing whatsoever if there is no yoniso manasikara throughout the day. And it shows in your behavior. At the very least, to you, it will show itself. So, the key shortcut or mantra that you could tell yourself is, where is my attention? It's pretty simple, isn't it? During the day, if you could just recall that, where is my attention being placed? And if you do that, that's half of the spiritual journey. The other is just persevering, and it just unfolds. So last week we talked about we saw how Venerable Sāriputta was discussing the first two of the four elements, namely Patavi and Apo, meaning earth and water. And again, these are not the actual earth element, the soil, dirt, solid rock. It's the quality of it, the feel of it. The same thing with the water. movement, fluidity. In addition to those things that do have that nature of wateriness, such as the ones that he named, the pus, the synovial fluid, the urine, the blood within the body. Ultimately, the nuts and bolts of this practice have everything to do with the body. We need the body. We don't negate the body. We don't run away from the body. We don't ignore the body. We need the body through and through if we're going to realize the ultimate that the Dhamma has to offer. So if you want to reach, quote unquote, Nibbāna, you need to start with the body. Venerable Anuruddha was again and again asked as to how he became an arahant. In the Samyutta Nikāya, in the Anuruddha Vaggas, you see it. Again and again, he comes back to the Satipatthana. Specifically, he goes back to the body. Venerable Ananda himself attained by observation of the body. So try to locate these four elements within the body. Next time you feel agitated, see if you could identify perhaps the wateriness, like if it's like a tumultuous ocean, waves, the storminess of it. Or as we're going to be doing today, the fire element. See if there's some elements of that fieriness, the flames, the blazing. When you see something and you become very passionate about it, or you hear something, it turns you really animated over it. Or it could be a subject matter, an issue. Somebody says something that you disagree with. Something even having to do with the Dhamma. I've seen a lot of people about to go neck at neck, just going to fight at each other, even monks and nuns on the Dhamma. Well, there's a lot of fire element there. I wonder if they were practicing mindfulness of the dhatu, or of the elements. So let's dig in. And what, friends, is the fire element? The fire element has two aspects: the internal fire element and the external fire element. And what, friends, is the internal fire element? All that is experienced within this body, all that is felt as heat or fiery, and considered to be yours, such as the warming up, the burning and decaying of whatever that is tasted, drunk, eaten, or consumed, which gets thoroughly digested, or any internal fire, and anything else that is seen as internal, belonging to oneself. And whatever that is of a burning nature, being fiery. And by the way, when references are being made for the internal, you can also see that as a definition or a reference to feelings, internally occurring feelings. So when we hear the word external, it could have started externally, such as stubbing your toe or somebody looking at you in a certain way. That was initiated, triggered by contact from an external source. So that also fits into that. And whatever that is of a burning nature, being fiery and warm, is called the internal fire element. Now, whether reflecting on the internal fire element or the external fire element, all these are looked upon as simply the fire element, which must be correctly seen as it truly is and with true wisdom in this manner. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. I've seen, and I mentioned this again and again, I've seen people turning this into a mantra, as if it somehow is going to be pervading within the body, within the mind, it's going to be part and parcel of who you are and your thinking and maybe even your realization, somehow, by simply repeating this mantra. It won't work. unless you associate it with some principle from the Dhamma. When you say, this is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself, such as in reference to the fire element, can you see that in terms of anicca? How? Because you weren't always so fiery, you know. You weren't so hot in your thinking, in the passions that arose. I've heard people say, well, I'm a passionate person, I'm a passionate guy, I'm a passionate. Well, always? Are you? Really? How do you fall asleep otherwise? You can't fall asleep being passionate, you know. You have to relinquish. So what's happening is then there is the fluctuation. Things are changing, basically. So you could use the principle of anicca as a way into really existentially understanding what this means. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. When you thus start seeing all this the way it truly is, with the right understanding and wisdom, then the heart becomes detached from being affected by the fire element anymore, as it experiences disenchantment towards everything that has to do with the fire element. You'll be able to see that there's a differentiation. I wasn't always so animated over this. Or just recall 5 minutes ago when this person wasn't here in this room, I was doing fine. Or before this phone call came in, or this text, I was fine. But now I'm all over the place. I'm, frazzled. I'm really disoriented, like fire. Why? There you go. Earlier it wasn't there, now it is. And when you say this to yourself and look at it with understanding and wisdom, what that means is you're pulling back, you're panning out, using a term from cinematography. You're panning out, you're pulling back from this being so fixated on this tiny little frame that you're looking at and saying, this is it, this is it, this is it. No, it's not it. Pull back, see the whole picture. In therapy, I remember years ago when I would be in a room with a patient, with an individual who would come for treatment, and I would see them completely enmeshed, lost in whatever it is, whether ideas, thoughts, which means feelings, their way of life, starting from this view, which you can see, understand that it's wrong view, but they don't see it. So intentionally, I had certain paintings in the room or pictures. And I would get the person to get up. I would ask them, do you mind if you stand up? And they say, no. They stand up. And I would say, could you please walk towards this painting or this photograph? And they would say, okay, hesitatingly. And they would, start walking towards it, and they stop 2 feet away. I said, no, go ahead, continue. They would get really close. Sometimes I had some patients even get this close, like the nose is touching the photograph like this. And they would say, are you serious? I say, yes. And I say, now comes the question. Tell me, what is it that you see? They would say, well, I can't see a thing. I say, are you sure? They say, yeah, maybe some blurriness, but everything is like, there's no clarity at all. Why? Because the nose is stuck on the painting or photograph. And I say, do me a favor and pull back by about 10 centimeters. And they would pull back, and I would ask them again, do you see anything? And they would say, yeah, now I see shapes and things, but it's still not clear. Could you take a step back by about a foot? And what do you see now? Now they see a bigger picture. And depending on the size of the photograph or painting, they're going to see more and more as they pull back. So when you are bringing in the principle of anicca, that things are changing, and you look at the fire element now, meaning you being so hot with emotion or distractions, restlessness, anger, frustration, hatred, dosa, where ignorance comes and says, because of moha, this is me, this is who I am, this is my feeling, this cannot be gotten rid of. Now, when you're pulling back, you're seeing, wait a minute, it wasn't always like this. 5 minutes ago, it was different. So you just pulled back, you're seeing a bigger picture. What does that entail? That means that this moment too shall pass. So it's not going to stay fiery. Even fire is not fiery, always. Even the sun is not always in flames, the same flame. Every minute or every second, there's countless nuclear explosions happening on the surface of the sun, but it's not the same explosion. It's always changing. So that could be truly a savior in those moments when you feel completely at one, identified with whatever it is that you're experiencing. Now, friends, there may come a time when the fire element gets agitated, enough so that it completely burns entire villages, cities, regions, states, and even countries too. But on reaching the boundary of moist green grass, or the end of a forest, or the coastline, or becoming halted by the presence of a body of water, or to some pleasant and open stretch of land, it finally dies down and extinguishes, owing to lack of fuel. So long as you're not giving oxygen to the fire, what's going to happen? Poof. There's a small fireplace right next to me here, and I'm staying in a small area, it's a yurt, and it gets pretty cold here. I'm in the southern hemisphere, so what you do is when you put the fire, when you're starting the fire, when you're putting the logs or pieces of wood and you're lighting it up, you need to also make sure there's enough oxygen going in. You have to give it oxygen. Every time you're giving attention, meaning asati or ayoniso manasikara, wrong attention to the thing, you're fanning the flames. Don't give it oxygen. Again, do you see how important it is to have yoniso manasikara, right attention? Right attention will say, hey, hold on, pull back, take it easy, pull back, breathe, pull back. And then you'll see, oh, I'm not this pain. Yeah, I see it, it's physical pain. It's hurting, I get it. The knee is hurting, I get it. But it's not like it's me. It just happens because I have a body. It's supposed to happen sooner or later, but it will also pass. At the very least, there's this thing called death, which means no more suffering. So death could be a cure at that moment to bring you back to sanity. Or there may come a time when people fight over fire that is made with a cock's feather or a small lump of lard. Even that much. People will fight over it sometimes. So as great as it is, and despite its powerful and proliferating nature, this shows the unreliable and transitory nature, the destruction and impermanence of even the fire element. And if this is the case when the mighty fire element, then what can be said about grabbing and holding on to this fleetingly brief and frail body, which is looked upon as mine or belonging to myself? Therefore, when others may revile, blame, defame, or disrespect the bhikkhu, then the bhikkhu should pause and carefully consider. This painful feeling that I am now experiencing was not always there. Hence, it is dependent on conditions. and not without its causes and conditions. And what is it conditioned by? What is its cause? It is contact itself. If you were sitting in a sensory deprivation chamber, no matter how many times the person was swearing at you, throwing mean gestures at you, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know. That's why deaf people sometimes, they have less insults to deal with, less feeling of being offended. I mean, that's one way of thinking, because one of the senses is closed off. How about you close off the other sense? But of course, that's not a wise way of approaching it, but just we can use these tactics, because in the Indriya Bhavana Sutta, we see how Lord Buddha mocks a person who comes, a student of another teacher of that time. And Lord Buddha asks him, Indriya Bhavana, by the way, it's from the Majjhima Nikāya, 152nd Sutta, the last of the middle-length discourse. Beautiful sutta, which we've covered in the past. And Lord Buddha says, Ananda, look at this student of this teacher. In order for them to practice the holy life, they have to close their eyes, close their ears, and close their mouth, etc., etc. So basically close their senses in order for them to be practicing restraint. So you're depending on outside conditions, basically. So a deaf person, I'm just clarifying that input that I was, or reference that I was making, so that people could understand that it's not the same thing when you think about it, when you approach it, because ultimately there needs to be an understanding of these six sense doors, from where all this input is coming, this data is coming. You have absolute control over this as far as your relationship with the data is concerned. Of course, when there's a noise, a bang, a sound, or a sight in front of your eyes, you're going to pick that up. But what we do with it, that's the key. That's the key. Because even the blind person or a deaf person is still going to have lust, anger, hatred, delusion, etc., like anyone else. So it is contact itself, which is the condition and the cause for experiencing this painful feeling. Then he carefully reflects on how contact itself is impermanent. The feelings it generates are also impermanent. The perception or memory of them is also impermanent, as are all the habitual tendencies and drives that are coming up because of these feelings and memories. When I use the term habitual tendencies and drives, I'm referring to sankharas. Okay? They're the ones that drive a person. And finally, the awareness and being conscious of the contact itself is also impermanent. All you need is a distraction. You don't believe me? Ask a little child, or look at a little child when you try to take away a toy they're playing with, which has become their whole life, until you show them something else, something more exciting for them. And what happens to this toy that they were hanging on dear life for? Poof, they drop it and they pick the other thing. And that's what a human being is. It does nothing, it has nothing to do with being a child or the mind. As far as the mind is concerned, we're just as childish, so long as we're putujjanas, that is. As a response to this, his heart becomes settled and more secure with these supportive signs that such contemplation brings up, along with the elemental changes he notices in himself. Thus, he becomes confident again as his heart springs forward with this newly gained faith, becoming pleased, trusting, and released. Faith is necessary. Trust your goodness, I keep repeating to you. How about confidence? A confident person is someone who sits nice. He sits upright, walks a certain way. You're not going to see them drooping or slouching or caving in their chest, meaning to protect the heart because they're ready to be hurt again. No, they open their chest, they walk broad-shouldered, they open up, their faces open, they're ready to take on life. I say this because sometimes I see students struggling with meditation. It's like, oh, they don't say this, but you see it. They're fighting themselves in order for them to sit to meditate. They don't have faith. They're just doing it because they have to. That's not healthy. It could be better. That's what I'm trying to say. Has this thing helped you at all? Yeah? Okay. Let's go digging for some more of those juicy experiences as far as deepening of the mind is concerned. Earlier I was saying whatever may be happening in the mind as you're sitting or in life, when you're experiencing, coming in touch with life, always come back to upekkha, equanimity. Always come back. That is your baseline. That is where your home base is, rather. Now, even if others may go ahead and mistreat that same bhikkhu by attacking him with insults or with hateful, painful, unwelcome, and unkind ways, or if they strike him with their fists, sticks, rocks, and swords, then he would understand and know how this body is conditioned in such a way that it is by nature susceptible to making contact with fists, sticks, rocks, and swords. It's like gravity. If you have a body, if you have a mass, if you have density, you're on a planet or a star, depending on what, you have a gravity to deal with, to work with. So if we have a body, then these possibilities are there because you are presenting them with the right condition, meaning you have this fathom-long body. People say, why do I have to suffer? Well, why not? You're here. Your existence, I mean, you have at least the rupa, khanda, the form, the four great elements. So they bring with them all these things. After all, as we know, this is Venerable Sāriputta saying, the simile of the saw, which the Blessed One had declared. Even if robbers and bandits cut you into pieces, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, whoever allows his mind to become defiled and agitated with hatred or anger, while being subjected to such torture, then he has turned his back on what I have been teaching all this time, and therefore he would not be practicing according to my dispensation. So even in that difficult situation, we need to hold ourselves accountable to keep the mind pure, the heart pure, not to invite the kileshas, not to fan the flames, not to give them oxygen, the asavas, the contaminants of the heart. No. This practice is an all-lifetime practice. It's a 24/7 practice. 60 seconds a minute practice. For this reason, my persevering effort must be untiring, with the kind of energy that is aroused relentlessly and with continuous mindfulness established within me, while the body remains relaxed and fully available, undisturbed by anger, and my heart fully collected in samadhi. Tall order. It's a lot of, this is life. Living life is not easy. Consciously, mindfully. You see, this is not just, what they teach in this secular Buddhist or secular, or these people that are talking about mindfulness as a one-size-fits-all, or like all encapsulating technique as such. and treating it like it was the teaching of the Buddha, that's it. No, they're missing the whole entire boat. It takes work. It's a moment-to-moment practice, ongoing practice. You're doing work. And that's why the benefit is irreplaceable. It is only to be experienced, directly known by the practitioner. You don't need to worry about others, because as the mind is getting collected in samadhi, you're purifying yourself. Parisuddhiya, purification, is happening. See, you don't have to be the person you were born as. You don't have to be just the person you came out of your parents as. The situations, the conditions, the circumstances, the global this, that situations, this planet at this moment of, depravity. We don't have to be on the receiving end of all these influences. No. You can completely change the very fabric of the universe through you. That's what Lord Buddha is saying. That's what Venerable Sāriputta is saying. You have that much control, that much power. Outside entities don't have the power. It's just ruse. It's just lie. To think that they do, they don't. Now, from such a state, let the body endure as it makes contact with the striking of fists, sticks, rocks, and knives. After all, this is how the teaching, the dispensation of all the Buddhas is put into practice. And if, while reflecting on and reminding himself of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, of the noble disciples, his heart still does not experience the appropriate, of the Bhikkhu, not experience the appropriate level of equanimity, then, as the Bhikkhu knows and sees how he is still not established in equanimity, he should immediately arouse the feeling of inner urgency, samvega, while exclaiming to himself, "This is so bad. It's such a great loss for me. I have missed such a rare opportunity. For until now, my heart still does not experience nor becomes established in the appropriate level of equanimity." It's like you going to the bank and discovering that you have negative balance in your checking, and you're about to pay for your mortgage, or you have to go and buy food, milk for your family, bread, and you have no money in your pocket. This is worse than that. Worse than a situation where your family is starving. That urgency has to be with you. And much like the daughter-in-law, who on seeing her father-in-law approaching would quickly be filled with a feeling of urgency, in the same manner, while reflecting on and reminding himself of the triple gem, if the Bhikkhu's heart still does not experience the appropriate level of equanimity, then as the Bhikkhu knows and sees how he is still yet not established in equanimity, he should immediately arouse the feeling of inner urgency while exclaiming to himself, the same thing, it's so bad, etc. I need to rush a little bit, but these are the repetitive portions of the sutta. I have the PDF online, so please do get it and follow it along, because I know I'm kind of going a little bit faster than usual. But friends, while reflecting on and reminding himself of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha of the noble disciples, if he does experience the appropriate level of equanimity in his heart, then he should be delighted. For this itself would mean that much has already been done and accomplished by such a bhikkhu. You're turning the tables on the person you were born as. And that's something you could really be delighted about. And this itself will increase your saddha, unquestioningly, your confidence. You will sit upright. You will be happy. You will be joyful that, I'm not as miserable as I used to be. I wonder why. Well, because you've been practicing, even a little bit. So long as you have yoniso manasikara, you're going to put the attention at the root of whatever's happening. And by doing so, you will catch yourself from that tendency. You will stop yourself from that tendency to believe the nonsense you tell yourself. This is me. This is happening to me. I can't seem to get myself out of this. Things are passing. Things are moving. Don't worry. There's this thing called anicca. It's a lifesaver, as is death. Now we get to the last element. And what, friends, is the wind or air element? The wind element has two aspects, the internal wind element and the external wind element. And what, friends, is the internal wind element? All that is experienced within this body, all that is felt as windy or airy and considered to be yours, such as the upward moving or the downward moving winds. Like when you feel like, belching, or you feel like you have gas, or gases is experienced within the body, winds in the belly or the bowels, and those that course through the limbs. Like in those days, that's how they would see rheumatoid arthritis, through the joints and the limbs. And the in and out breathing, that's a very obvious one, example of and for the wind element. And anything else that is seen as internal, belonging to oneself, and whatever that is of an airy or windy nature, that is called the internal wind element. Now, whether reflecting on the internal wind element or the external wind element, all these are looked upon as simply the wind or air element, which must be correctly seen as it truly is and with true wisdom in this manner. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. I just had a thought about like people who sing. Earlier today, I was talking with a group of students in relation to opera singers who make their living through their voice. And if there's a tiny little blemish, a fracture in their voice, how it's coming out, they would lose money. Entire concerts would be just canceled. It has to be perfect. That could also be brought into this schema of what we are discussing, given the impermanence of things, including the air element. But the person sees and identifies oneself as the air element, meaning I am my voice. And that's why many of them go through severe chronic depression as they age. The greatest tenors, the greatest sopranos in history have all gone through some level of depression, anger, resentment, got into addictions like drugs, alcohol. Why? Because they lost the very identity as to who they were. That could be used as an example of what we're talking about here. When you thus start seeing all this the way it truly is, with the right understanding and wisdom, then the heart becomes detached from being affected by the wind element anymore, as it experiences disenchantment towards everything that has to do with the wind element. Now, friends, there may come a time when the wind element gets agitated, enough so that it completely tears apart and blows away entire villages, cities, regions, states, and even countries too. Or a time may come, as in the last months of the hot season, when people desperately seek out even a gentle breeze, as they go on fanning themselves to create wind, yet not even the edges of the thatched grass hanging from the roof would move or stir. So, as great as it is, and despite its powerful nature and free range in motion, this shows the unreliable and transitory nature, the destruction and impermanence of even the wind element. If you've ever been in a hot area, hot climate, especially when there's no breeze, you'll start to, understand, and appreciate an air-conditioned room or being at the edge of a breezy shoreline. Like a few months ago, I was in Thailand, and we were one place where the elephants, we were out in a sanctuary for elephants that were saved, and the owner, the person who ran it, saw us, and she was so respectful. She wanted to do something. She asked us to go to this other area of the sanctuary where no tourists go, but it was on the side of the hill. There they kept the wild elephants. But as you're there, you're also exposed, so you're no longer in the shade, and there weren't any trees. And it was that time of the day where the sun was just taking a time out just to blaze you, dry you up of every single molecule of water in you. So it was an interesting experience. So you look for the wind, you look for the breeze to come and soothe you. And that is one way to also look at your meditative practice. Life is very dry, life is very hot without meditation. You need to bring in the breeze, the softness in your practice. Otherwise, you will become very rigid, and in rigidity, there will not be any wisdom. For sure. Lord Buddha tried that as a bodhisattva for 6.5 years. He was completely, absolutely unsuccessful. Only when he became soft, he allowed room, he opened the windows, if you will, to his practice, and suddenly life came back to him. And if this is the case with the mighty air or wind element, then what can be said about grabbing and holding on to this fleetingly brief and frail body, which is looked upon as mine or belonging to myself? See how Venerable Sāriputta was known for his way to, in taking a concept, a principle, a thing, a phenomenon that was being discussed, a concept, a question, and he would bring it into the arena of the Dhamma. He would explain it so that the listener could go deeper in their understanding or develop wisdom for the first time. So he's now using the 4 elements to teach something that is so multifaceted. You see here, of course, the 3 singhatas, the 3 characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta. But he's also talking about pragmatically, practically, of the value of using the body to understand and also develop metta. So he's hitting so many targets, if you will. Therefore, when others may revile, blame, defame, or disrespect the bhikkhu, then the bhikkhu should pause and carefully consider. This painful feeling that I am now experiencing was not always there. Hence, it is dependent on conditions and not without its causes and conditions. And what is it conditioned by? What is its cause? It is contact itself, which is the condition and the cause for experiencing this painful feeling. He's talking paticca samuppada. If everybody nowadays who talks about, oh, I'm a vipassana practitioner, I attend vipassana, I know vipassana, nonsense. Unless they're practicing this. This is Dhamma. Vipassana without Dhamma is stupidity. It's a waste of time, degrading our human potential. Venerable Sāriputta is beautifully laying it all out. And you see here, he's talking vipassana, insight. He's giving you penetrative insight. He's allowing you into his mind and showing you how you can approach this in a 360 manner. We can see how his right brain is beautifully working, by the way. The connections that he's drawing, the bridges. Then he carefully reflects on how contact itself is impermanent. The feelings it generates are also impermanent. The perception or memory of them is also impermanent, as are all the habitual tendencies and drives that are coming up because of these feelings and memories. And finally, the awareness and being conscious of the contact itself is also impermanent. So when we're practicing vipassana, we need to be seeing all these things. And if you're not, stop wasting time. Come back to the Dhamma and practice our actual Dhamma. Okay? As a response to this, his heart becomes settled and more secure with these supportive signs that such contemplation brings up, along with the elemental changes he notices in himself. Thus, he becomes confident again as his heart springs forward with this newly gained faith, becoming pleased, trusting, and released. A person cannot remain a slave and call oneself, I am released. You cannot be a slave and still call yourself liberated. That's the whole point. I mean, you're being liberated from slavery. And that liberation comes through understanding. No one is giving it to us. Now, even if others may go ahead and mistreat that same bhikkhu by attacking him with insults or with hateful, painful, unwelcome, and unkind ways, or if they strike him with their fists, sticks, rocks, and swords, then he would understand and know how this body is conditioned in such a way that by nature it is susceptible to making contact with fists, sticks, rocks, and swords. When in my teenage years, I was going through the growth spurt, and I was growing in height rather, I think, exponentially. And what happened was we had like a few chandeliers in the house. The doorways, I kept on banging my head against these objects. And I would blame the chandelier for being too low. But it wasn't too low because everybody else was going underneath it fine. They weren't getting bled, they weren't hurting themselves. I, on the other hand, was. Until finally it hit me. It's like, if you were not getting taller, you wouldn't have this problem. Also, my grandmother, who was very short in stature, she one day told me, you are tall. You're supposed to be a slave to us, short people. So she would always call me to the kitchen to help her with the cabinets, like she would want this and that. So I would be the, that crane that would get all the stuff for her. So side note. But if we don't have the body, we won't be experiencing those experiences, those things, those fractures, those fissures, those scratches. Don't blame the shoes. Don't blame the size of those shoes. Blame the ignorance that despite the fact that your feet are getting bigger, you're still trying to squeeze those feet into those small shoes. After all, as we know from the simile of the Venerable Sāriputta is repeating that. So, for this reason, my persevering effort must be untiring, with the kind of energy that is aroused relentlessly. Now, for such a state, let the body endure as it makes contact with the striking of fists. So you have to have intellectually understood The intellect is not completely to be discarded. It's Lord Buddha never says that. When Lord Buddha was asked about what is a valid form of knowledge, where do we get it? People thought that he was throwing rationality out the door and this and that, because he was saying, don't go by hearsay, don't go by what your teachers said, or it came down through countless generations of, people, Upanishads and all that. He was dismissing those. But Lord Buddha never threw away reason and rationale. However, it was not the ultimate form of knowledge upon which you can actually base your understanding of life, of experience. That is necessary, but it's not the whole picture. One still has to experience the truth using all these different references. Inference is one as well. Even things that you haven't seen, but there's a suspicion that it might be there. Inferential knowledge. So you use all these things, but you are the laboratory where all of these things come alive. But they cannot unless you have the necessary data. So that's why Venerable Sāriputta is bringing all these examples. You don't have the Kakachupama Sutta in the sutta, the simile of the saw. But he brought it here. He's also talking about upekkha, equanimity. He's also talking about anicca. He's also talking about anatta. So we need to use as many tools as we can to help us in those very difficult moments of confusion. Why? To protect ourselves. And you cannot know that you need protection unless you have right attention. Wise radical attention, yoniso manasikara. And Venerable Sāriputta says the bhikkhu has to look at himself and see that if he hasn't yet reached a level of deep equanimity in the face of all these difficulties, challenges, then he needs to say, this is so bad, etc., etc. I'm paraphrasing at this point, of course. But friends, while reflecting on and reminding himself of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha of the noble disciples, if he does experience the appropriate level of equanimity in his heart, then he should be delighted. For this itself would mean that much has already been done and accomplished by such a bhikkhu. Friends, just like a certain enclosure that is made up by the binding together of timbers, sticks, vines, grass, and mud, where the space that forms within them becomes a house, likewise, an enclosure made out of bones, nerves, and flesh is matter or form. What a beautiful, short, simple way of explaining Rupa Khanda. He just used the four elements to explain to us the first aggregate. Remember, Lord Buddha didn't say a human being, this, or that, me, this, as a thing on its own. No, it is made out of parts, conditions. And the first condition of a human being, think of it as a condition, aggregate meaning it needs to rely on other things. The first one is rupa, or form. But he's not going to stop here. Now Venerable Sāriputta is going to meticulously, in his superb manner of teaching, incorporate it within the context or formula of the six senses. And here we go. When internally one has a functioning eye, but does not come across any external visible forms, and nothing comes to view due to the absence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the eye with visible forms, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness does not arise. So, if you have a functioning eye, but it doesn't come across an actual visible object, let's say at nighttime, absolute blackness, and you walked out of a room that was lit into a space, a room that is absolutely dark, your eyes need adjusting. So they will not see what's in front of you. That could be an example here. Because Venerable Sāriputta says, then sense awareness or vijnana, chakku vijnana, the eye consciousness will not arise. That's one. But he's not done with the eye consciousness yet. So, and when internally one has a functioning eye, which comes across external visible objects, but nothing comes to view due to the absence of necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the eye with visible forms, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness again does not arise. So the person has to be engaging with attention, engaging with the thing being looked at. I remember when I was teaching junior and high school sciences, and sometimes I would see some students looking at the whiteboard and I just explained it and wrote it. The whole thing is covered with diagrams and things, explanations, and I would see them like this. And sometimes I would have to do, hello, welcome, are you here? Can you pick up what I'm saying? And then I would see them like, oh, sorry. What happened? Their eyes were there, they are physically there, and the thing to be seen is there, but they are not seeing it. Why? Because the attention is not there. And that's another reference, by the way, to yoniso manasikara. But when internally, I don't know if I've finished it, okay, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the eye with visible forms, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness again does not arise. So there is no chakku vijnana, even though the eye is there, the thing is there, but the attention is missing. The bridge isn't there. But when internally one has a functioning eye, which comes across external visible forms, and visible forms come to view due to the presence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the eye with visible forms, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness does in fact arise. Wow. This is long before science. Venerable Sāriputta is beautifully explaining to us what is happening to create eye consciousness. And this is only the one of those consciousnesses. Remember, we have 6. Now, whatever matter or form that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of nama-rupa that one grabs onto. The form. Similarly, whatever feeling that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of Vedana that one grabs onto. Remember, Venerable Sāriputta was talking about the 5 grabbing aggregates, Pancha Upadana Khandha, that we started last week. He's still answering that because it was too long and we had to extend it to this week. So based on what the person has seen, remember, Chakku Vijnana, he's referring to that. And now he is delving into, if you noticed, the subtle way that he went into and stretched into the area of the 5 aggregates, using the 4 elements, but at the same time connecting them with the bridge of the 6 sense doors, specifically in their consciousness aspect, meaning eye consciousness, nose consciousness, ear consciousness. So here is the eye consciousness. So Vedana, meaning earlier I was saying about being in a sensory deprivation chamber, right? So if you are, or you're closed up, you don't see, you're in a room where it's a one-sided, one-way mirror. You don't see what's outside happening. Let's say it's reversed. Let's say somebody's sticking their tongue at you or making funny faces at you. You won't see, so you're not going to feel anything. So that's the Vedana part. So there's no room for you to be holding on to. Why? Because you didn't see it. Eye consciousness didn't occur. So by the same token, whatever memory or mental association that arises, sanya in this case, as a result of this process, because of the aggregate of sanya, that one becomes the aggregate of sanya that one grabs onto. Again, we're dealing with rupa here, the form. Whatever habitual tendency or drive that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of sankhara that one grabs onto. And whatever sense awareness or consciousness that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of vijnana that one grabs onto. It is in this way that he sees and understands. This indeed is how the five grabbing aggregates come together. And by leaning on each other, they accumulate and momentarily appear as one, behaving together. Here, Venerable Sāriputta is bringing us back to the earlier mentioning of this is not mine. This is not myself. Can you see that? This is crucial. There's this thing called the perception of the compact, what we like to simplify. This is a bottle. This is a thing. This is a tree. This is the wind. This is the sound. Yesterday, there was a very loud sound coming in through the forest. And I looked at the students who were around me. I said, where is the sound? What is this sound? What is it a result of? But what is this? It's a sound. We just put it into one little bracket and we called it sound. Okay, fine. Where is it coming from? What is its source? Now, your hearing is there, yes, ear consciousness, but if no conditions were there happening outside, you wouldn't be hearing it. That's only one of the conditions. Every single leaflet on every single branch of every single tree is also part of the condition, as well as the temperature, the time of day, gravity, wind patterns, time of the year, elevation, all these things play a part. You being there, obviously the ear consciousness. But we like to compact it, put it into one. Yeah, ghana sanya, yes, yes, compact. A person, yes, individual. In this society that's all full of individuality and this, identify yourself as such and such a thing. Identify yourself as a turnip. You know, everybody's identifying these days themselves with something. Especially those that say, I identify myself as a lion. Okay, my solution to that problem, I was mentioning it to some students. Next time somebody like that says that, take him to the zoo. Place them in the lion's den. When they say, I identify myself as a lion. Put them with the lions, with his brothers and sisters. Let's see what happens. Let's see how long that identification will last. So, it's not a ghana sanya. That's not healthy to think. So we break it up. And that's what Venerable Sāriputta is doing. He's talking about paticca samuppada. That's why he brought up the key point, which is contact. But you will not see contact unless you have the secret ingredient, the very valuable microscope or telescope. And that is yoniso manasikara, which is sati, essentially. Now, remember what our Lord Buddha has said. He who sees dependent arising sees the Dhamma. He who sees the Dhamma sees dependent arising. He who sees the Dhamma sees paticca samuppada. He who sees the paticca samuppada sees the Dhamma. As you see, these five grabbing aggregates arise dependently, and thus each could never stand on its own. Never. Therefore, the removal and giving up of desire and lust for these five aggregates that one grabs onto is itself the cessation and ending of suffering. We have to give up that chandaraga, it's called, the desire, the fervent interest, and raga, that passion, that this is it, this is the hot, this is the fiery moment. This is me, this is happening to me. The feeling, it could be the feeling. It could be the drive. Oh, don't blame me, it's just the way I am, type of a thing, you know? All these things that we have put within parentheses or locked it in, concretized, they're all fake. With this, it must be declared that indeed much has already been done and accomplished by the Bhikkhu. So when the Bhikkhu is able to see this and experience this and understand it, now because he did the eye consciousness, next comes the ear consciousness. When internally one has a functioning ear, but does not come across any external audible sounds, and nothing comes to one's awareness due to the absence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the ear with audible sounds, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness does not arise. So if you don't come across any externally, I don't use the word just sound. I like to use also audible sounds, like dogs, for example. They hear sounds that human beings will never be able to hear naturally. So that's why they're not talking, Venerable Sāriputta is not talking about, you know, well, he's talking about audible sounds. He's not just saying sounds. So it has to be heard, just like earlier I was giving the example of walking into a dark room and you have objects, but they are not visible. They must be visible, meaning there needs to be some sort of light reflecting off of them, which makes them visible. Again, when the presence of attention is there. And when internally one has a functioning ear, which comes across external audible sounds, but nothing comes to one's awareness due to the absence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the ear with audible sounds, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness again does not arise. So now you have the external sound, you have the ear that functions, but there's no attention being given. So one of the exercises that are really good to develop concentration is to, next time you're somewhere, you know, especially when there's a few sources of sounds coming in, having giving yourself the time to delineate, to scrutinize the number of different sounds that you're able to pick up. This is a technique that I used to use with patients, especially those that have anxiety disorders. Sometimes you hear about ADHD, hyperactivity disorder, etc. So what I would do is I have them, encourage them to, you have to gain the person's trust, and you're sitting there and you say, you don't have to close your eyes, but if you're comfortable with closing your eyes, go ahead. But let me see if you're able to pick up the sounds. Let's go with 5 or 3. Tell me which sounds you can identify. So they would say, oh, the sound of the, your voice, or if I'm quiet, they would say perhaps the sound of the air conditioning, the sound of some people running outside, the sound of their breathing or my breathing, the sound of a fan in the room, etc. The car passing. Guess what? As they're doing this, their central nervous system becomes to a point of regulation. It becomes more relaxed. They're not hyperactive. And guess what? They are practicing concentration. And the mind is becoming more and more still. So I just wanted to say that as a side note for you to be aware that there's so much going on, but the ear consciousness is not picking any of them up. But when internally one has a functioning ear which comes across external audible sounds, and these come to one's awareness due to the presence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the ear with audible sounds, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness, vijnana, does in fact arise. Now, whatever matter or form that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of namarupa that one grabs onto. Remember, he is explaining what pancha upadana khanda is, because that is you have an equal sign between a person and pancha upadana khanda, especially putujjana, a common, ordinary, dense person, is a person who has pancha upadana khanda. They identify as, this is who I am. This is me, this is myself. So he is tearing all that up for the person to see, wow, there's so many parts involved in this. Similarly, whatever feeling that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of Vedana that one grabs onto. Late Venerable Jnanananda would say, the most interesting musical instrument is the eardrum. Imagine that. Without it, you're not going to hear any musical instrument, any music, for starters. But next time you're having a feeling arise, good, bad, neutral, check whether it had started because of a contact with what you heard, specifically with what you paid attention to in hearing. So you basically listened. So sometimes you intentionally have to ignore, especially when you're surrounded by individuals you know are talking about you, especially if you're working in small areas or the insulation isn't so good and you have neighbors or something like that. Like in Los Angeles, I would be, as a layman, I would be driving. And when I would go to the office, sometimes people are very, very, and still it's in the morning, like there's no reason for people to be so, road raged. But you would have people trying to cut you off, this and that. And even sometimes I would allow them in and they would give you gestures, not good ones. Or sometimes they would honk, or they would lower their window and stick their heads out and start screaming profanities. So one interesting thing you could do is you can turn on the music. If it wasn't on, you can turn it on. Or ignore, consciously ignore. But you have to be having sati first to see that's coming. Why though? What are you doing? You're protecting yourself. Why though? Because the sounds that are going to be coming in, they're going to trigger certain feelings, which are going to do what? Pancha upadana khanda. You're going to say, this is me, this is who I am, you hurt me. And I'm going to do something similar to what they did. This is life that Venerable Sāriputta is talking about. Whatever memory or mental association that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of sanya that one grabs onto. Whatever habitual tendency or drive that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of sankhara that one grabs onto. And whatever sense awareness or consciousness that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of vijnana that one grabs onto. It is in this way that he sees and understands. This indeed is how the five grabbing aggregates come together. And by leaning on each other, they accumulate and momentarily appear as one. behaving together. Now remember what our Lord Buddha has said. He who sees dependent arising sees the Dhamma. He who sees the Dhamma sees dependent arising. And he repeats that same. As you see, these five grabbing aggregates arise dependently, and thus each could never stand on its own. Therefore, the removal and giving up of desire and lust for these five aggregates that one grabs onto is itself the cessation and ending of suffering, meaning the person is released. The person has attained. That's why they're coming apart. And whatever five khandhas they have, it's called saupadisesa. Saupadisesa with residues remaining, meaning the person still is alive because you need the aggregates working together to function still as a human being. But you don't have upadana at that point. You're released. You see what's happening. You see the sanya, if they arise. The thinking process, you see it. The Vedanas, you see it. But you just let them end right there and then at that point of contact. You don't carry them home with you from moment to moment. With this, it must be declared that indeed much has already been done and accomplished by the Bhikkhu. When internally one has a functioning nose, but does not come across any external odors, and nothing comes to one's awareness due to the absence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the nose with odors, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness does not arise. Like the other senses, the same thing here. If you don't have the object of it, that's the external. The internal is the actual nose perception. And when internally one has a functioning nose, which comes across external odors, but nothing comes to one's awareness due to the absence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of et cetera, with the nose odors, nose with the odors, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness again does not arise. So the attention has to be given. Now, when you walk into a bathroom that someone, let's say you're going to public bathroom, and someone has just used it, and that was the only stall, and they really had to pay back, let's say, and you walk in and you have to go in, what's the first thing that you are hit by? The smell, the stench, the odor. There's the shock. But if you notice, as you remain there, because you have to be there, unless you felt like, no, forget it, I'm out of here, this is too much. But if you're staying there, you start to, you notice that the odor didn't go away, by the way, it's still there. But suddenly your mind starts to engage with thinking or processing, or some other consciousness is active. Maybe it's the mano vijnana, the mind consciousness. Now you're lost in your thoughts because nothing else is going on, or you're playing with your phone, for example. Eye consciousness. Or somebody comes in yelling and screaming. You're not going to have both, by the way. Nose consciousness and ear consciousness, together. One of them is going to win. Let's say the hearing or the ear consciousness won. What happened to the nose consciousness? Still, it's out there. The chemicals are there. The molecules of the stench are still there, permeating in the air, in the room, in the stall. So the attention went elsewhere. So you're not going to smell it. And when internally, but when internally one has a functioning nose, which comes across external odors, and these come to one's awareness due to the presence of the necessary condition of attention. So now you're giving attention to it, then there is sense awareness of that consciousness. Same thing, whatever matter, etc., with all of the khandhas. It is in this way that he sees and understands. This indeed is how the five grabbing aggregates come together. and by leaning on each other, they accumulate and momentarily appear as one, behaving together. Appear, not are. Please know the difference. Now, I know it's easier said than done, right? But that's where we need to have yoniso manasikara. Just take that with you and use all of this stuff as supplementary stuff for you to fall back on. As to why I need to practice yoniso manasikara, Bhante, for this. If you use yoniso manasikara, wise radical attention, you are talking about Nibbāna happening to you. But it's not going to happen without yoniso manasikara. Forget it. Now, remember what our Lord said about, so he repeats dependent arising, he who sees it, sees the Dhamma, he repeats that. Therefore, the removal and giving up of desire and lust for these five aggregates that one grabs onto is itself the cessation and ending of suffering. Now we go to the tongue. When internally one has a functioning tongue, but does not come across any external flavors, and nothing comes to one's awareness due to the absence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the tongue with flavors, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness does not arise. Now, similarly, he talks about when there is the tongue that functions and the external flavors, but there's no attention, then again, there's no sense awareness. I'm paraphrasing here. But when there is the tongue that functions and the flavors that are there, and there's attention given, then there is tongue consciousness or sense awareness of the tongue that does in fact arise. Now, whatever matter or form that arises as a result of this process becomes the aggregate of nama, rupa, etc. So he lists all the other aggregates. This indeed is how the five grabbing aggregates come together, and by leaning on each other, they accumulate and momentarily appear as one, behaving together. And we go to the body consciousness. When internally one has a functioning body, but does not come across any external tactile objects, and nothing comes to one's awareness due to the absence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the body with tactile objects, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness does not arise. Again, you need to be making contact with the objects, meaning in this case, tactile objects, for their sense awareness. Again, though, attention must be given. One of the easiest ways to have a person connect with the body is ask them how their elbows feel, left elbow for fun, or how the right knee feels against the texture of the pants or robes or something that they're wearing that's touching the knee. There's no attention usually to these areas, or the back of the calf muscle of the legs. Why? Because there's no attention. That's why you're not going to be aware of it until someone points it out, which means attention is sent there. Instigated by someone else's words, by the way, or direction. But when internally one has a functioning body, which comes across external tactile objects, and these come to one's awareness due to the presence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the body with tactile objects, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness does in fact arise. So the attention has to be there, like I was just explaining. And then he covers the five aggregates in relation to this sense consciousness or sense awareness. And then we go to the sixth one. When internally one has a functioning mind, but does not come in contact with external situations that would cause him to experience thoughts, and nothing comes to one's awareness due to the absence of the necessary condition of attention, which is the complementariness of conscious engagement of the mind with thoughts, then the respective consciousness or sense awareness does not arise. Perfect example would be when the person is experiencing sloth, drowsiness. Nothing necessarily is happening. Absent-mindedness. There's no specific, actual, tangible thought, if you will, that's happening to the mind, because there is no thought arising, but then also there's no attention. So you're not aware that you are perceiving something. And that's why I've asked sometimes people, what were you thinking? They say, I don't know. Sometimes I stop people mid-sentence when I'm, interviewing them, what's going on right now? They're like, I don't know. This has also its, it could have its beneficial side or positive aspect of it, because when you're going deep in meditation, thoughts will become less and less and less and less and less and less and less. So there are no, like, especially if you're experiencing the seventh jhana, for example, the realm of nothingness, there are not going to be any thoughts, but that's a totally different thing that we're talking about. But again, we can relate that with mano vijnana, of course. That's why you know that nothing's happening, right? But when internally one has a functioning mind, etc. Okay, so it is in this way that he sees and understands. This indeed is how the five grabbing aggregates come together. And by leaning on each other, they accumulate and momentarily appear as one, behaving together. Now remember what our Lord Buddha has said. He who sees dependent arising sees the Dhamma. He who sees the Dhamma sees dependent arising. As you see, these five grabbing aggregates arise dependently, and thus each could never stand on its own. Therefore, the removal and giving up of desire and lust for these five aggregates that one grabs onto is itself the cessation and ending of suffering. With this, it must be declared that indeed much has already been done and accomplished by the Bhikkhu. This is what the Venerable Sāriputta said. Meanwhile, the bhikkhus present were filled with joy in their hearts as they carefully listened to Venerable Sāriputta's teachings on the Dhamma. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. What a powerful discourse that Venerable Sāriputta gave us. I had a few students who said, Bhante, this has everything in it. Everything. It's so loaded with depth. It has depth. It's dense it's saturated with Dhamma. So I encourage you to go. I know that today I had to a little bit, go a little bit faster. But I encourage you to go over it. Hold the PDF or just refer to it, or any of the other versions of it online. So, but this one I opened it up, and when I translate, I have to explain it in different ways. I try to systemically look at what is being said and make it more relatable to our time, to the human condition, contextually flesh it out and make it relevant to you as a meditator, especially. So it could actually impact you personally. So you're going to find the translations usually being longer. But that shouldn't deter you from looking at them with more attention. So I'll pause now and ask if there are any questions. Are there any? Let's see. Well, if there aren't any, why don't we go ahead and do the transference of merits to all those beings who are struggling in one way or the other, whether through psychological, emotional, especially social, hitting us all, pain, physical, of course, goes without saying, old age, sickness, and death. fears, being destitute, worrying that you're going to become destitute or lose everything, all that is dukkha. So may there be peace, may there be softness, may there be confidence and faith, and may there be love and consideration towards one another. That is missing. Whether we're in robes or lay people, consideration is lacking. Putting oneself in the other person's shoes and just being for a moment. So even in the comfort of your own home, just sending out, radiating that consideration out. May beings be happy. Even if I don't agree with them, they mean me harm, they're even evil. That's fine. This is all for you. And you're elevating the quality, the vibration, if you will, of the whole cosmos to a higher level. Akasa Hatthipadopama Sutta Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Loka Sasanang. Akasa Hatthipadopama Sutta Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Desanang. Akasa Hatthipadopama Sutta Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Man Paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you all be well. May your heart always be smiling. May there be wisdom growing in you all day long, at night time too. So may the Triple Gems blessings be with you all and your loved ones. Sukhi Hotu.